Another EBJ podcast, Life of a Bowhunter, man. This is an awesome episode.
Heck yeah, another one in the books. I can't believe how fast it's going.
Yeah, able to talk about Hawaii and get into some stalking skills and some information about between the ears and the ability to kind of calm yourself down and make shots. So I thought that was like a real interesting conversation talking about that. And then we moved to broadheads and performance and wind. Man, it just made for an awesome conversation.
What really gets me excited about this podcast is all the impromptu tips and experiences that come out that you can't plan for that I feel like are so powerful. And this was one of those episodes that I'm so fired up about.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And then some of the stuff like our spooky close calls with arrows, that stuff puts shivers down my spine there with the broadheads and arrow shafts and just talking over some of that stuff. I think that's a powerful to be able to learn from that and learn from some of our mistakes, as we did share a couple bonehead moves that we both made with arrows.
Yeah, it's actually embarrassing, but it's real life. And the mistake I made with my wife's bow and her shooting a cracked arrow is scary stuff. But we'll reveal some of the details on that on this episode coming up.
Yeah, 100%. Well, yeah, I definitely want to thank Juniper Mountain Coffee for their sponsorship of the podcast. We're such a young podcast, and to have them step in to enjoy the podcast and listen to it, like these guys are hunters, and they stepped up and partnered with us on this podcast, which just means the world to me. That they do that, and then the coffee, their roasts are so good. Like this isn't just a marketing for Juniper Mountain Coffee. Like these guys really know their coffee in and out and have top roast from local growers, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's one cool thing about Juniper Mountain Coffee is that they're a small family-owned company, and they go down to Panama and build relationships with the growers, and they make their transactions directly with the growers, and so they can select exactly the type of coffee that they're looking for, that they're after, and they know exactly what they're getting. And it's just so cool to be partnered with another small family owned company. And maybe not many people realize that Eastman's Hunting Journals it's a small family owned company. And so when we have sponsors like this that saddle up with us, and we're so like-minded and aligned on Western hunting and coffee, of course, it's truly special. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I'm a coffee snob too, and so the test for me is to be able to taste the coffee, and their roasts are just absolutely unreal. Like that's whether they're sponsoring the podcast or not, that's my new coffee roast, and the only thing I'll drink for the next bit, because I just love the quality of their coffee. So yeah, great people, great company, and great coffee. Make sure to go check these guys out at Juniper Mountain, and I hear that they have some instant that is coming on the market as well. So be on the lookout for that. And I'm really excited to have some of that stuff come hunting season.
Absolutely. Awesome new products coming up. I can't wait to see what they come up with, but I couldn't be more excited either.
Yep, absolutely. And make sure to check out everything we're doing over at Eastmans. So Dan's giant bull, his biggest bull to date, has been released on YouTube. You can find on Eastman's Hunting TV on the Beyond the Grid series. What an amazing bull, Dan, man. Amazing video, the footage that you were able to capture on that deal.
I was so excited to share this with everybody. Obviously, over the years of all these elk hunts that I've been blessed and lucky enough to go on, this was my favorite. It's ultimate adventure, covered up in grizzly bears, encounter with just a true specimen of an old mountain warrior. For me, it doesn't get any better, and to be able to share that with everybody, truly honored. And yeah, what an awesome release! Great response from guys. I really appreciate all the messages from everybody, and the support. And it's truly been an incredible run here with this first episode of the new season.
Yeah, an amazing film, dude. It's just incredible, and it's it's a lifetime of work for you, really improving on your skill sets as far as capturing the hunt, filming, creating the story, and then to have it all come together on your biggest bull to date, man, it's just absolutely amazing. Yeah, I'm so pumped for the season. What do you got coming out next week?
Yeah, so July 29th is my Montana bull. We're starting off big with 2 big bulls, and it's just crazy how last September unfolded. But I killed another bull that would have been my personal best in Montana, and just how it unfolded. And you're not going to believe how you just can't plan this stuff. It's crazy, but you're not going to believe the shot and the recovery was not one of my best shots, but incredibly lethal, and the recovery was just as crazy.
Man, yeah, nuts. Well, I can't wait for that release and to watch that film as well. We have other good ones coming out this season. Of course, you can look at our backlog of hunts. There's a bunch of hunts that Dan and I have put together and done that we're really proud of. So make sure to go check that out on Eastman's Hunting TV, Beyond the Grid. You search it on YouTube and find it. It's for free for everybody to watch. Check out our magazines, Eastman's Bowhunting Journal, Eastman's Hunting Journal. Pour our heart and soul into those articles to really share the information that helps make us successful. And check out our other podcasts as well. I've got the Eastman's Elevated. It's on its own feed over there. Ike's got the Eastman's Hunting Journal podcast. So there's definitely some good listening to be had on there on our other podcast platforms. So give us some support there.
Yep, absolutely. And don't forget about the Eastman's online mule deer course, preseason special right now. You get Black Ovis game bags, you get an Outdoor Edge knife, you get 10% off of the course, and your name goes in the hat to win a mule deer hunt with Eastman's. So tons of big things going on this summer. Get it before season because the price is going to go up after that.
Yep. And we really appreciate all the support of this brand new podcast. So make sure you subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, really helps us out. And also just really appreciate the shares on social media to help get the word out. It's so tough to build a podcast in today's environment, but I think we've got a great product here. And so we just really appreciate you guys passing on the word and really helping us make this podcast go. So.
Yep, that's huge. Thanks for all our listeners and the support and the shares. It's pretty awesome to see, and we're going to keep rolling as long as you guys keep loving it.
That's it, man. Let's get into this episode. It's a good one, Dan.
Heck yeah, let's jump in.
Hey, good morning, Dan. Hopefully you got a cup of coffee in you, huh?
Oh yeah, fresh.
Nice, good work.
Stuff. Yeah.
Man, that Juniper Mountain coffee is sure good, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, it's hard to beat a logo #1, but it's quality coffee.
Yeah, just Western guys too. I love being associated with that brand, especially through the podcast, man. It's been awesome.
Yep, for sure.
Yep.
They're great dudes.
Yep. Well, good, dude. I'm just getting back here. I'm glad you could jump on this morning. Kind of running myself ragged. It's in Hawaii, and I don't think I even visited the beach. I don't think I even sat down till the last day. It was just so busy. Do you run Hawaii like that too, where you're just running by the seat of your pants?
Oh yeah, no. In the past, I laugh about it. Usually, I take my wife Eva with me, and we do hunts and stuff. But it's like, yeah, we're there like 9 or 10 days, and we realize we haven't even been to the beach. Like, what's wrong with us? And like every morning and every night we're hunting first light, last light, and then we're exhausted, and so we go to bed early, and it's just a hunting vacation.
It is a hunting vacation. Yeah, I swear I'm so sleep deprived and traveling and then being up every morning. And then I'm hanging out with really good friends too. And so, we're not staying up late or partying or anything like that, but it does seem like we stay up till like 10, 11 o'clock visiting and go, oh man, it's getting late. We got to get to bed. We got to be up in 4 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of a shame too, like all these years of going over there, and I haven't really taken advantage of the fishing. I love fishing. You love fishing, but like I just haven't really. I've gone out like twice probably in 10 years. I just rather bow hunt.
I know. Yeah, I that and the spear diving and there's so many things to experience. I was going to go fishing with these guys for a lua for a weekend tournament, but we just got busy hunting. And then, I did do this one really cool fishing trip where we took Janus's boat, and they call it whipping, but it's basically like casting a Rapala, but he just holds the boat like in the surf. And so, all these waves are crashing into the beach, with these waves, and then it creates this white water, and you're all against the shore in these cliffs. And then you cast like this Rapala into the white water right next to the cliffs, next to the rocks, and reel it in and get eats that way. It was a really thrilling way to fish. It was awesome.
Oh, I bet. So what they're in that whitewash, just all the stuff churning up, and they're in there feeding.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a little bit spooky having the boat that close to the cliffs, but Jay's got a nice boat and good control of it. But yeah, so I've done a little bit, but yeah, this trip was pretty much all hunting, man. There's every time I go out there, man, it's just like, we talk about it making you a better bow hunter. It's just the experience you can get out there. It's just like almost a whole season in the States, just the stalks and plays, and those animals are so switched on. Like the Axis are so switched on, so fun to hunt. And then those Mouflan sheep are just ridiculous, man. Their eyesight is just crazy. I think it's as good as an antelope or better. You just can't make any mistakes on those things.
Yeah. Last year hunting them, it's just like I haven't like worked that hard in being so stealthy in my entire life without getting seen. I'm talking like belly crawling on the ground, staying as flat as I can, because you're just paranoid they're going to pick you off, because they are something else. Their eyesight's incredible.
Yeah, and you can't really walk anywhere. You've got to glass everything in front of you, every little piece of country, because if you're exposed and walking anywhere, they have you from hundreds of yards, and then the gig's up. And you talk about belly crawling. Dude, I had the perfect scenario. I had this great 3/4 ram with a smaller ram, spotted them on a ridge. They were bedded in the shade of a Chiave. And I got over there, and then I saw him at about, 120 yards over the rise. Didn't know I was there. And I had a Chiave in front of me, or like in between us. And I thought, man, I'm just gonna crawl in there and get in close and then shoot him when he stands up. And so I just belly crawled, just dragging my belly. The wind's blowing right from them to me, or a little bit of a crosswind, and just dragging myself in with a tree in front of me. And I got to about 70 yards, and there was a little rise there, and I wasn't next to the tree yet, but I could kind of get over and then get a clear shot at that ram when he stood. And so I'm sitting over that rise, have no idea I'm there, and I'm 70 yards, which is a pretty long poke for those small animals. And I'm sitting there, and I know I can make that shot, but it's like, gosh dang it. Sit there for a bit, and I'm like, well, I know I can get 10 or 15 more yards to that tree. I better try to get it and then get just a little bit more of a comfortable shot on those things. And so I just drag myself, but I'm totally blocked by the tree, dragging my belly across the ground. And I get to that bush, I get my 15 yards, and I look up, and that ram is staring right at me. He's like pegged me through the trees, crawling, and stood up, and I never got the shot. I'm like, man, those things are switched on. You just... stuff that you get away with on other species, you just can't get away with on those things. So, man, it makes it super fun.
Definitely. And guess what? You're ready for fall, no doubt. That's skill that you're building, and you're honing your stealthiness, and just being a keen hunter. I mean, it doesn't get any better. You're hunting probably one of the hardest animals to hunt with a bow in the Western Hemisphere. And then you go into bow season in the lower 48, and it makes everything here on the mainland look like child's play. It really does.
So true, man. Yeah, those and the Axis deer. I don't know how many trips I've done to Hawaii, like maybe a half dozen. I'm so fortunate. I got such good friends out there that really helped me with the logistics out there. But I was able to harvest a great ram, which I was really pumped. Like, numbers are down, hunting's tougher. Like, out of our group, there was 8 guys, and we only killed 2 rams, and one of them was like this great ram I was able to put a good shot on. And then I did get a chance to hunt Axis quite a bit, and I've been on the search for a 30-inch buck, and I know you've killed a handful of them, and you're really good at hunting those Axis. It's kind of been my nemesis, and I have two of them that are 29. In fact, I killed one that was 29 and a half this trip. And so like that 30-inch mark has just been eluding me. And the last day I was able to arrow a 31 by 32 and a half, my best Axis deer to date, man. I was super
Nice.
pumped, just great mass on them. And then, yeah, just great action, great hunting. Those guys have some good spots lined up. So yeah, it's just an amazing trip, man.
Heck yeah, that's awesome. Congrats. It's not easy. I was having that conversation with Eva, and she's killed a couple 30 plusers with a rifle out there, but it was quite a while before I killed a 30-incher, and man, just so many 28s and 29s, like right on that threshold. But to get like a true 30 with your bow, when you're not doing it all the time, you're over there for a week, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's a challenge. It's a true challenge. And so yeah, killing a true 30 pluser is really is an accomplishment.
Well, and those things, just like everything, they really sharpen like your still hunting abilities. They really sharpen your stalking and things. And man, I mean, I can finally judge what a 30-incher is. And I tell you, they like getting into range is only half the equation. Like getting the shot is so difficult over there. Like I had some great bucks that just, they're in range. I've got a good range on them and they just don't stop moving in your window, and if you make a sound to stop them, then they're on high alert, and they're an Axis deer on high alert that's going to jump your string, or, they're quite a ways out there. You're busted. So man, I was just playing the game, and it's so important to me to execute correctly, and I'm either going to make a good shot or I'm not going to make the shot. But I had quite a few of those where I just didn't get the shot just because he wouldn't stop moving, or I'd just start settling my pin and then he'd start walking, chasing a doe again, or walk through my window. It's like it really reminds me at how tough it is to get the shot on these critters. And sometimes deer and elk are easier, but sometimes it's the same thing where you get in close and that elk just keeps walking, chasing the cow, or every time he stops, he's behind a tree or behind some cows, or like, man, getting a shot, getting a true good shot and good window on those animals is really difficult.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And especially, coming off of what, several months, when's the last time you shot an arrow at an animal before this trip?
Yeah, well, I had that trip in Australia in April.
That's true. Okay. So it's been
Yeah.
a couple months, but so, a couple months, and I wanted to touch on this and ask you about it. So anticipation's high. You get to Hawaii, you're on your first stalk, or maybe your second, third, but that first arrow, like how do you, I mean, were you wound up? We've talked about this in the past a little bit about nerves, but what was your mentality with that first arrow? How how was your anticipation? Like were you shaky? Were you nervous? Were you relaxed? Tell me about the situation on that first arrow.
Yeah, so definitely had some nerves going, like just getting to play at those Axis deer. But my first shot was fairly easy. I think it was one of my closest shots I've ever made. It was about 7 feet. So it happened pretty quick. I was just like still hunting through some of that dark forest, and there was animals in there, and then just creeping along and just caught these antlers in front of me and this Axis deer in front of me, and able to kneel down so it didn't see me. And then as it started to walk out, I was able to draw, but he didn't stop walking. Like just like we're talking about, he was walking,
Yeah.
and so I shot him on the walk at about 6 or 7 feet. I think it was one of my closest bow shots. So I really
Okay.
didn't have time to get the nerves on it. I just kind of reacted. But I totally understand the question that you're asking and what you're talking about, because it does seem like nerves are on absolute this high. Like anytime I get that first stalk or that first play, I'm almost shaky. My legs are shaky. My footfalls aren't as good. And then when I draw back, like the bow is pretty shaky too, where I have to wait to get it honed in. I'm just all ramped up at the beginning of it. And that's with elk or deer or Axis or anything at first. Like I definitely have those nerves going. I just feel like I get in the groove of things. It's kind of like antelope. It's like I make my first stalk, maybe I got a little nerves or I draw back and the pin doesn't quite settle. But it seems like once I can get myself in the game and I fail a time or two or I make a couple plays, I just get comfortable with it, whether it's a mule deer, an elk, or whatever it is. Then it's just like I'm just immersed in playing that game of trying to get that shot, trying to get that stock. And I almost like my nerves seem to kind of fall away. And then I just get to hunting and my instincts kick in. Do you find it the same way, Dan? Do you get nervous on your first stock of the year?
Yeah, no, that's kind of what I wanted you to illustrate, because I think it is really powerful. And to guys that might be coming out west for their first hunt in the fall, or even Western guys, is the first, animal, or maybe archery antelope, or, opening week of archery in the West, this is probably the first animal that you've shot at for over a year for most guys. And so what you're describing is real and it's powerful. And I get the same thing. I'll get my nerves amped up, anticipation's high. And so I try to, maybe even that positive, that self-talk, calm down, take it slow, couple deep breaths, that can help. And, that's a big reason why I know it's important to bow hunt as much as you can, because you learn how you react to that first arrow of the year, and how your body responds to that anticipation or the pressure or anxiety or whatever it is, and you're trying to control it. And so that's a huge part of hunting, because once again, if guys are coming out west, or they're on their bow hunt, you might only get one chance. And if you're amped up, nerved up, and that's part of the journey as a bow hunter too. But if you have all these emotions at play on that first arrow of the season, or that first encounter in bow range of the season, and you blow it, that could be your season. That could be it. That could be the result. And so while even us, we've done this a lot of years, we still get amped up, and we still get excited, which is part of why we do it. That's normal. The day I don't get excited, I'll probably quit bow hunting. But learning how to control those emotions and those nerves is what's really at stake here, and what's really powerful. And that's something to really pay attention to. So it happens to the best of us, the nerves, and being able, and what I think is really cool, what I took away from your first stock, you got right in on that Axis buck, and you shot him super close. Like, that's a gift, and that's awesome. But it still took you to know okay, I haven't hunted in a couple months. I've been in normal everyday life, fast paced. It's, every instant gratification. Not that we're like that, but you were able to slow down and put yourself in that other, that, four-wheel low, that low speed creeping in that dark timber, and knowing that, and just turning it down a notch and going into slug mode. And that's hard to do. And that's what makes bow hunting so difficult, going from fast-paced everyday life to being able to just turn it down and move slow, move at axis deer bedding time speed, slow moving. It's very slow hunting. And so that's commendable right there. That first hunt, that first stock, getting in and just being able to turn it down and go slow, that's huge.
Yeah, what a great point, Dan. Yeah, you're so spot on. In the moment you lose focus on those axis deer, on whatever it is, in those axis deer, a lot of it is still hunting those thicks where they're bedding or really slowing down. Even when you're hunting their feeding features in the morning and in the evening, you just have to really slow yourself down. If you just start walking to find the next one, you're sure to blow animals out and not get the chance. And then you blew animals out. And so there's no animals right around you. So you start moving quick again. It's like keeping that focus and being able to move slow, being intentional with your movements, with your noise, really believing the animals are there. Like it's an absolute mindset. And you can hunt for 2 hours and not see an animal and be still hunting. And the moment you lose focus and you just start walking, you blow out a great big buck in front of you. And I think that applies to all this hunting. And I also like your tips about deep breaths. Like I get on that first stalk And man, I'm just like ramped up like you're talking about. My anxiety's so high. I'm shaky. I've got this adrenaline pulsing through me. I'm getting this chance. And it is almost like it's tough to calm yourself down from that. But just like you're saying, I like to take those deep breaths and just breathe and just remember why I'm there and then try to really slow down. And if I'm absolutely ramped up where I can't place my footfalls, like it's so shaky I can't even place my footfalls, like I'm just going to take a minute and just slow down, and I'm going to move ultra slow. And I try to think about it like, either that buck's still there and I'm going to get a shot, or he's not going to be there and he moved off, and that's fine. But I'm not going to move too fast, and I'm not going to be the one to blow it up. I'm going to slow down. I might even take a minute and collect myself and take some deep breaths and then keep going with my stock. But just remembering to be slow and precise, and then remembering my shot execution and not just putting the pin on hair and punching my trigger, like really making sure that I'm, drawing back, letting my pin float and letting that shot break, So I'm trying to keep that in the forefront of my mind as well. But it is so tough. The first stock of the year, the first hunt of the year, and you finally see these animals, you're just so ramped up and excited. So I think that's super important what you're talking about, Dan. And it is tough to control, but there are some things that we can do to kind of get ourselves ready.
That's the beautiful thing about bow hunting right here, what we're talking about. It's so mental. Like bow hunting is mental. The what bow you shoot, don't get caught up on it. The backpack you're using, don't get caught up on it. The ability to control your mental game is what really is going to take you to the next level on being a successful bow hunter.
Oh, it's so true. It's like, and you hear these professional athletes and, they'll throw out equations like it's 90% mental. And sure, they're like super athletes that were given a genetic gift, or, like even like in bow hunting, as you progress through the stages of bow hunting, you just realize like how important the mental game is. It's like almost everything. It is the most important thing. It controls your drive, your thought process, your stocks, your shot execution, calming yourself down, but it's in between your ears. And so like really working on that mental game to be sharp and to be at your very best. Like if you were just to work on one thing in bow hunting, to work on the mental side of things and the thought process and the how you approach things, and then your drive in the mountains, if you could just work on one thing, like that might be the most important part of bow hunting. Because you think, if you can just keep your stuff together and execute good shots, you will kill critters out west, even if you're not very good at finding them. Like if you can just keep that mental side, positive attitude, quality execution, like, man, that is really the key to being consistently successful.
Absolutely. Okay, I have one more question for you.
Mm-hmm.
What what was your experience with the phase 4? Like with the shot break and noise from the bow or lack thereof. But what did you see with animals hearing your bow go off?
It's incredible, Dan. It's like my favorite bow I've ever shot. Like not only because of the sound, but because of the forgiveness of the bow and just how dialed it is. But the sound is a game changer for Axis. I think that possibly is the reason why I've never shot a 30, is like I have 1 out of 3 or even 1 out of 2, probably 1 out of 3 that'll jump my string. So I'll finally get a shot at a 30, and then that thing will move out of the way of my arrow or twist or bend or go away. I didn't have one animal jump my string the entire trip, which was crazy. And there was animals that I shot and the herd would just stick around. Like, I was there to control doe populations too. And so it made it pretty nice. I'd shoot a deer and nothing really knew what happened. Or I'd shot that mouflon, I shot that ram, and those other rams just hung around. Like they didn't even react to it. Dude, it is crazy how quiet that bow is, or the vibrations of that bow. It just doesn't spook animals. So I mean, that bow has been an absolute killer for me just in these Australia and that Hawaii trip. It's just been absolutely amazing. Haven't had any animals jump my string, and that's why I'm super excited for this year. Like I had a mule deer jump my string last year, the last one I stalked to fill out on this hunt that went 7-8 days, and the thing got out of the way of my arrow. And I just have confidence this year that that's not going to happen. That bow is so quiet, man. I was so pumped on it.
It's so crazy. I mean, obviously I had the same experience when I was Hawaii, with the Axis. Just the herd had no idea when I shot, and I don't know. I mean, it's not like the Phase 4 has, no noise. Like every bow is going to have noise to some degree, but I don't know if it's just like they killed that frequency that they can hear really well or something. And I want to mention too, like this podcast is not sponsored by Matthews or anything, but this is like real stuff, guys. Like the Phase 4, like something is different with this bow, and if the frequency of the noise that the limbs make when the bow goes off, like the animals just don't hear it, plain and simple. So that's awesome to hear. Like it was really like staggering to me too on my hunt.
Yeah, absolutely. And then out there, I use that evolution hybrid out there, the hide, and man, it worked really well for me. It flew really good. I shot it before I left. It's a really aerodynamic head. I love that it's like sharpened both ways on that fixed out front, and then that expandable blade really cuts a big hole in it. And I like for me, like all our setups are different. And so it's really tough to choose a broadhead that somebody else uses. It's like gotta fit me and my bow hunting. And so I love the hybrid, or like I love an expandable broadhead just because of the aerodynamics and the forgiveness. And I really feel like it's where you hit that animal. But I feel like that evolution does get me a better chance at getting those animals on a marginal hit with such a big opening. Now, if I'm being totally honest, I know you've shot a bunch with that hybrid. And I've killed a lot of deer and antelope with that hybrid, and I've killed elk with them too. But I don't tend to get the as much penetration with that big opening on the hybrid. So like for me, I like to use them for deer, for antelope, and like for Axis and these Mouflan. It was perfect. They're a smaller animal, opens a big hole, killed them quick. It did great for me. But for elk, I almost tend to like they're fixed more, so I like their Jekyll more just because it's a smaller diameter and it's like a 4 blade, so it flies really well. It almost flies exactly like the expandable, but I tend to get better penetration with it for those elk, so I can get like an exit on those elk. So I tend to prefer that one for elk, but I know you really like the hybrid for elk and have had great success with it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm lucky too in the fact that I have so much power in my setup, numerically. So yeah, I'm like at 90 foot-pounds on the chart, for power. And the old Easton charts, they say you need like 69 foot-pounds for a Cape Buffalo. So I have, 20 extra foot-pounds of energy. And so when it comes to bigger game, I don't really hesitate shooting that hybrid at it. Like I killed a moose with the old hybrid design that Dale Perry made, and all my elk too. But yeah, you still got to be careful of that bone. You don't want to hit him in the shoulder. But yeah, I don't hesitate on the bigger skinned animals, the bigger boned animals, and it just makes sense because for me, obviously, I want to stay away from the shoulder. And some guys, shoot heads that are going to break a shoulder, go through a shoulder, which is fine. But still, when you look at the side of an elk, the soft spot of an elk behind the shoulder is probably 70% of the elk's body, and the shoulder is probably like 10%. So I shoot a head that is going to, and for a target that's big, 70% of that, that elk's side from, basically the liver and diaphragm forward, that's a big target. I'm going to shoot a head for that area. And it's been a game changer for me. I know how many bulls I'm at that I've either watched expire or they've gone 100 yards or less, with that hide. I know you've been gone. I don't know if you saw my Wyoming episode yet, but I shot that big giant bull and he went 24 yards and tipped over
Hmm.
like in 6 seconds. And I didn't get a pass through. I hit bone and it buried on the far side, but with that cut diameter, man, they just can't go anywhere, and it just kills them so quick. And so that's probably the biggest takeaway is just the lethality of them. And I've shot some elk with the Jekyll too, in Idaho when it was illegal to shoot mechanical blades. Now it is legal, but yeah, the Jekylls, I mean, they're penetrating machines for sure. I mean, I feel like I could shoot an elk from stem to stern with one of those, and it's going to go all the way through.
That's what I like about them, man. They just penetrate so well. But yeah, I think I might use that hide, that expandable, that hybrid. I've just had such good luck with it on deer and antelope, and I have killed a couple elk with it. I think I might go to that because just like your bull, you make a great point. Like the shoulder, I don't get through the shoulder. I've got a 26.5-inch draw. I've shot ultra heavy arrows. I've shot fixed blade. I just don't, I can get through the weak part of the shoulder, but a lot of times if I hit that shoulder of an animal, it's not getting through. And so you make like a really good point. You also don't want to hit these animals too far forward. Like I've seen it where you tuck just an arrow so tight to the shoulder that it's just in the pocket exactly where you aim, but that animal's like a little quartering away or he turns at the shot. And so the arrow comes out the far side shoulder in front of the far side shoulder. And I've had that shot be too far forward and had to put another arrow in that animal or really tough to catch up to. So I don't think you want that shot that far forward. Those rifle guys like to hit the shoulder to drop them. And then that bullet gets in there and does so much damage. But those vitals actually sit back. And I like to aim for the center of the vitals. And I think that center of the vitals is halfway up the body, 4 inches back from that shoulder. And then if you miss towards the shoulder, you get it in the pocket and he dies. Or if you miss the other way, you get the liver and he dies. And so it's really like giving yourself room for error to the left or to the right. So I really practice aiming 4 inches off that shoulder on all species. But you bring up a good point like that, that hide, it's a more forgiving head for shooting him in the middle and in the brisket because it's got like 1 5/8 expandable that opens up and you get such a good entrance hole with them. And so you get this big entrance hole. So, I hit a lot of animals that I hit the far side shoulder where my arrow doesn't pass through. But if you get it into an elk and hit him in the spot and it hits that offside shoulder, that bull's going to make it like yours did, 20 some yards. It's just that broadhead's going to do so much damage going in. And then you've got this really big entrance hole in it. So, I'm kind of thinking, Dan, that I'm going to try that hide. I'm going to go back to it this season and shoot a bull with it and just do some more testing with it. It's been such a good head for you. And I know I've got the energy to get into that animal. And, I don't know that I always need a pass through on them to kill that elk and kill it quickly. So I think I might go back to that. I just think those expandables or those hybrids, it's just a forgiving head to hit them in the brisket because it just does so much damage. And so that's going to do more damage than the hide's going to do going into that same spot. And that hide's been a great head for me, and it penetrates so well that I get pass-throughs at all different distances at elk is the reason why I really like it. And I've used it for elk season, but I think I'm going to try that hide a bit more for elk. I think my setup's got enough energy. So I'm going to do some testing with it and see if I can't use it this season. But a great head, man. Super pumped on that thing. It did really good for me in Hawaii. Killed everything I shot at. So super pumped on it.
Did you get short blood trails and pretty quick kills?
Yep, short blood trails. Those animals don't bleed much out there, man. It's like, some of those hits they do, but it just seems like they're almost a bit dehydrated or something. And maybe it's just the dry landscape. That dry dirt just soaks up blood, that dry grass and things. But yeah, I mean, I usually get just amazing blood trails, like the best out of those heads out there. But yeah, there's a couple hits where, they didn't make it too far and died where they were supposed to, but really had to be on my hands and knees. At least when that animal is first hit and he takes off on a dead sprint like that, that first 50 yards of a blood trail can be really tough to follow, no matter which head you're shooting, no matter what setup you're using. Like, there's like a process there that you have to get really good at when you're a bow hunter. It's like when you shoot that animal, you got to remember where you're standing, where that animal was standing exactly. And then the last place you saw that animal go, or sometimes even rushing over the hill a bit to get eyes on that animal to see where he goes. just because out there the blood trails are so tough on these small animals that are dehydrated. But this goes for any animal. You can make a great shot on a deer or an elk, and that thing takes off, and you're fist pumping thinking you got him. You walk over, and then you're like, where was that animal standing? Where was I standing? Where was the last place? Where was the direction he's going? Like, that information is so critical and crucial in those few brief moments after you release an arrow, to really pay attention to make sure that you're going to track that animal down, be able to find those first few drips of blood that then will lead you to the blood trail and lead you to that animal. But it's super important, I think, when you're shooting at critters.
Yeah, the longer that you can keep your eyes on them after you hit them, the better. Being able to have that visual sight, and instead of starting and looking for blood right where your arrow impacted the animal, if you can keep eyes on them, then you have a closer place to start looking for blood. If you can build a reference point, and it helps to having them on video as well. But if you're like, okay, that buck just ran right past that tree, that's a huge advantage if you can keep your eyes on them, like you're saying. And going back to the blood trails, and sometimes they don't bleed. And I've always been, the type of guy that I have to have a pass through, and that kind of changed with this hide over the years of shooting it at the biggest boned animals. And on elk, I probably get a pass through half the time if I'm up, in the bone and the ribs, and half the time that expandable portion, like I said, it's 1 5/8, it stops on the far rib. But it's never been an issue with recovering the animal, because they can't go anywhere. They are always under 100 yards. And so it's never been a problem. Yeah, of course I prefer a pass through, but it doesn't really matter. If you're putting that broadhead in the ribs, it's over. I've never seen an animal get away from me or get very far away from me because that arrow didn't pass through, as long as you're putting it in the ribs. And it's, when I first started, I was so wired to be a fixed head, like a cut on contact broadhead guy for elk. And I was like, there's no other way, to shoot. Mechanicals are stupid. They're reckless. They're not guaranteed to open. And so I was not a mechanical guy at all. But once I tried them and I started, harvesting of my first few animals with them, and then seeing the proven results, it's like, I can't imagine going back to a fixed head, if I had to. I mean, I would, but just the lethality of them is so incredible. And, it's a game changer. It's probably, in the last 10 years, it's the biggest improvement that I've done to my setup, hands down. Just, it's made my life so much easier on that follow-up and finding animals, and just not having to track animals.
Man, yeah, that's you're right, man. I'm such a believer in these expandables for sure. And yeah, I think need to be less worried about that exit hole, and I know I've got plenty of energy, and just put them in the middle of that ribs, because you're right, they just do so much damage that they make them more forgiving. And if that animal is dying inside 100 yards because that broadhead did so much damage, it's like, you're going to find that thing. There's just no doubt about it, where a smaller head through a marginal spot and the vitals in there, like, those animals can go a long ways. I've seen bulls carry arrows 300-400 yards before they die pretty easy, and it can make them a lot tougher to find, especially if it rains after you hit them, especially if it's a high hit where his cavity has to fill full of blood before he starts really bleeding good, or if he takes off on a dead sprint where you don't have a good blood trail to start for the first 50 yards. But yeah, I mean, the way those things are doing damage, if you're finding those animals inside 100 yards from all that damage, then you're just 100% going to find that animal every single time. If you stick it in the ribs, stick it in the vitals in there, and that bigger cut gives some more forgiveness. So Yeah, man, I've had like really great success on deer and antelope with those expandables and or that hybrid head. And so yeah, I think I'm gonna use it a bit more for elk. I've kind of leaned towards that fixed blade for elk, the 4-blade sharpened both ways, which is also a great head. And it's done really well for elk for me. It does really good damage. I get the penetration, I get the pass-throughs that I was looking for. But yeah, I think I'm going to use that hybrid a bit more just due to the damage. I think it's a more forgiving setup. And all this, like, it really comes down to where you hit the animals. Guys like to blame animals getting away or a bad hit on the broadhead, and surely the broadhead is really important of what you're tipping the front of your arrows with, the damage that it's going to do, the style of head. Like, it's definitely, like you said, like, it's one of the biggest moves you've made to getting your critters consistently is doing that damage. But in the same breath, it's all where you hit these animals.
Yeah.
Like, the majority of heads are going to hit these animals. They can't live without their lungs, heart, or their liver. And so I think it's important to find a head that has real forgiving arrow flight, to where you can hit the spot that you're aiming. And also, like, arrows are affected so much by wind drift, and also, the bigger the blades on the front of the arrow, the more steering it's going to create on the front of your arrow. So therefore, the less forgiving they are. And if you shoot broadheads a bunch, you realize that broadheads do not fly like field points. Like, you get them dialed in to where they hit in the same spot, but it's just not a forgiving a setup. And that goes for fixed blades, that goes for expandables. Like, there's more blades on the front, which catches more air, which steers that arrow. And so like, shooting a real small aerodynamic head is probably like the most important feature for me, just because I know if I hit them in the right spot that they are going to die. And so, like, a lot of my broadhead choice is due to accuracy of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It plays a huge role. Like you said, hunting out west, wind is a factor, and especially antelope hunting. And wind can carry a fixed head. They do catch a lot of wind. And I was talking to my buddy Tyler a couple days ago. He's tuning his bow, and it's broadheads, with those fixed heads up front, depending on the design, but they act as a steering mechanism. Fixed blades do. And so not only do you have vanes in the back that are steering your arrow, now you have vanes up front that are steering the arrow, the blades. And so if you're out of tune, you're not going to hit. And I want to stress too that, like, shooting a mechanical head is not a fix for having a bow that's out of tune. And I always tune my setups with a fixed broadhead like the Jekyll, or I even like putting on a big old, cut on contact blade that's going to catch a lot of wind, because that's really going to magnify the imperfections in my arrow flight. I'll tune with those and get my broadhead shooting, in the grouping with my field tips. And then you screw on a broadhead like the Jekyll and the Hyde, and it's like nothing. It's like screwing on a field tip and shooting. You're going to be golden. And so, yeah, it plays a big factor in that wind drift and in Western hunting, 100%. So, yeah, definitely good things to consider.
Well, and it doesn't have to be a 20-mile-an-hour wind to blow your arrow around, too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like even a slight thermal breeze of 3 to 5 miles an hour will blow an arrow sideways quite a impressive distance. And yeah, I do find that, shooting a field point, they'll wind drift. The wind will blow them on the shaft and on the fletchings. And then when I screw on expandables, they're even going to blow more than a field point because they've got a little bit more out front. And then you stick on a fixed blade, and a fixed blade will almost wind drift double the distance of a field point. They really catch that wind and blow over it. So yeah, it's like important to know your setup, and then important to find like a low profile head. I do think that's a great point that you're saying, Dan, when you're broadhead tuning, that you broadhead tune with the biggest fixed blade head that you can find, because it does magnify the imperfections in the arrow flight, or it just helps with tuning that bow. And I do that exact same thing, as I'm shooting a huge fixed blade when I'm dialing in my broadheads, because then, like you say, you throw on that low profile head and it just flies money. And so yeah, I definitely do that same thing. thing. But yeah, it's super important to find a broadhead that's going to shoot accurately and have that forgiveness so you can put it in the right place. Because you hit any animal in the wrong spot, like an expandable will give you a better chance at getting them, but it's not 100%. If you don't hit the lungs hard or the liver, or you hit the edges of those spots, or you hit something back, like, man, you're just in for a tough time, and it's definitely not 100% recovery if you don't hit those vitals.
Yep, exactly. And that right there, what you just explained, is what a hybrid does. With that big cut diameter, it can make those marginal hits very, very lethal. And Dale Perry said it himself. He says you shoot a broadhead for the marginal hits. Anything that's sharp that you hit perfectly is going to die, right? That's not even a question. It doesn't matter. As a 2-blade, little tiny head, if I smoke them double lung in the X-ring, that animal's not going to go very far and die. But you shoot a broadhead for those marginal hits, the edges of the liver, the edges of the lung, maybe the diaphragm, and maybe you get a quartering shot a little far back. And I tell you what, these far back shots, liver area, if you shoot an animal with a small fixed head, you're probably not going to find that animal. You shoot it with a hide, or a hybrid broadhead with 1 5/8 inch cuts, that animal's not going to go 100 yards. I've seen it over a dozen times. It turns those like far back hits into very lethal shots. And I laugh at it too, because I love those quartering shots and, staying far back with that hide. But like some of the YouTube comments I get, who's like, oh, Pickar, he gut shot another animal. What's new? And I just laugh at it, because I found that animal within 100 yards, and it's actually very, very lethal. You cut through that diaphragm and liver with a huge hole like that, it's lights out quick, bottom line. So it's a different mindset. It's a different way of thinking about lethality, but it's taking it to the next level when you're shooting a bigger cut diameter head like that. And so I encourage, and you don't have to go shoot the Jekyll or the hide. You don't have to shoot the hybrid that we shoot. But if you can go out and find a hybrid head, or a mechanical, if that's the way you want to go, that has a bigger cut diameter, match that to your setup, you're going to see results, and those blood trails are going to be so much easier for you in the future. I guarantee it. There's just no way it won't be.
So true, man. Yeah, it's such a powerful message too, when you're listening to guys that, like, when you shoot a lot of animals with heads, you get to try out different things and see the results of it. And both me and you have just seen great results from those expandable heads like that do that damage. So yeah, man, I'm gonna use those hides more. Or I do use them a bunch, but I'm gonna use them more for elk instead of that fix this season. I've just made up my mind. It just does so much damage, and after talking to you, it's like and I have killed an elk with them before, maybe one or two, but yeah, I think I'm gonna go back to that head for them just because of the damage. Just to pivot a little bit, Dan, do you we walk around with like 6 broadheads in our quiver, in our arrows. Do you ever think about the safety of those arrows, like falling out of your quiver? Like, you hear some horror stories of guys like on horses, or getting off horses, or they have an arrow fall out of their quiver. I've even heard of guys that hit animals, and they're over looking for that animal, and they run into that broadhead into their shin or into their calf or something. And it's something I think about when I'm in Hawaii, because I'm shooting at those animals. It's in that tall grass, and you're over there looking for that blood in that arrow, and you're just kind of like stumbling through the grass over there, like trying to get them. But dude, those broadheads are so dangerous. Not only for you, you also have to watch your buddies being knocked up behind you, or being knocked up like when you're calling elk, or like the dangerous situations of drawing around people. You really have to watch where you're standing and watch those heads. Have you ever had any close calls, or do you think about that with your broadheads?
Oh my gosh, all the time. You have to have. I'm almost paranoid about it, because you've heard the horror stories. You've heard, David Brinker sticking himself in the calf, when he was hunting and bleeding out, and he was okay. He got lucky, but that's like my worst nightmare. And growing up in the Flathead Valley and hunting that brush country, and you're walking, you're beating all this brush, and you're hunting with a buddy or two, and I've walked into arrows before. They get knocked out of the quiver, and there's a arrow laying there in the bushes, and you like walk into it. And I've never been cut or anything, but it just goes to show you how easy it really is to hurt yourself with those things. And you got an arrow nock. That's like a loaded gun. Don't point that thing at me. Are you kidding me? Yeah, it's crazy. And so, yeah, you have to be so careful. And man, in the backcountry and with horses, and I mean, you're in the wilderness, and your only help is a helicopter ride if you get hurt, because you're not getting out if you stick yourself. It's like you just have to have such a heightened sense of awareness and staying safe, because it can end like that if you're not careful.
Man, it's so true. Those things are so sharp, and there's 6 of them in the quiver. You just gotta, like, I shot an animal, and then, I'd set my bow down or whatever, and I looked, and one of my arrows was loose on my quiver, had pulled out of the quiver holding spot, and was just the broadhead in the foam. And, I walked right over and put it back in, but that loose arrow could tip off my bow as I'm walking through the grass, and then, stab me. So I think you got to be really careful. And then any arrows I find in the field, like, I'm always picking up anything I find in the field. I don't think, arrows are meant for being laying out there, So, like, but the first thing I do is I unscrew the broadhead and then put that arrow in my pack or in my quiver, whatever it is, to pack it out of there. But I just don't leave arrows with broadheads laying around, because, man, I just think somebody could trip over them. And then I'm always like cognizant of my own arrows. But yeah, they're so sharp. I also, it's a requirement, I never have anybody knocked up behind me ever. Yep. It's like, if you're knocked up, you're in the front, and I don't walk around with a knocked arrow very often. Like, I'm pretty much, like, if I'm walking the last 10 yards of where that animal's going to expose himself, I may knock up, but I'm not traveling 200 yards with a knocked up arrow. I'm going to keep it in my quiver till it's time to get it out. But yeah, I think it's so important to have that heightened sense of awareness around those broadheads. They're so razor sharp. You just can't make any mistakes. And like you say, you cut yourself with one of those, they're meant to do damage with those razor blades. And that could be damage on humans or on yourself if you graze yourself with those things. And also being really careful as you're screwing them on your arrows, as you're messing with them, as you're replacing blades, as you're looking at them, like, just this heightened sense of awareness, because, man, those things can get you. And I think it's one of the biggest dangers in archery that we don't really think about. And dude, you want to know one of the scariest things. So I was hunting Hawaii, and we're shooting deer, and we're in the field, and I'm finding arrows, and then it's so hot there, you got to get those animals butchered quick, and you got to get them back to a cooler with ice. There's no hanging them out there, and so, like, when you shoot an animal, it's like, man, all hands on deck to get this thing out so it doesn't get too warm, so you can bring home the meat. So, found my arrow that I'd shot this buck with or whatever, put it back in my quiver and butchered the animal, hiked it out. And then I was sitting over at my buddy Rob's place, and he was asking about that fixed blade, the Jekyll or whatever. He was asking about it. And so I go, oh yeah, I just shot a deer with it. Here, let me show you this thing. And I had shot a deer with that fixed blade head. And so I pulled it out of my quiver and gave it to him, and he was looking at it. And dude, he looked, and there was just like a little fracture on the shaft or whatever. He's like, hey, your shaft's got a little cut there. And I grabbed the arrow from him, or he handed me the arrow back and did the stress test on the arrow, and the thing snapped. Oh. Dude, it is like, and I had it sitting in my quiver, and you know how sometimes you're just grabbing an arrow to finish a deer, and usually that's in the last place in my quiver, like, that I shot an animal with. But I could have shot another deer and pulled that arrow out and didn't check it when it went back in my quiver, and man, have that carbon just explode on my bow and send fragments. I've never had it happen, but that just reminds me how diligent I have to be to never put an arrow in my quiver unless I stress test it. I look for cracks and I look for weaknesses in that arrow. And if it shows any sign of weakness, it's like, pull your nock, pull the broadhead out of it. That is not an arrow that you reshoot. If there's any crack back on the nock from hitting something hard, sometimes they'll fracture back there. Just throw that arrow away. It is not worth running carbon through your arm on that thing. And there's so much energy in these bows. We get so comfortable around them where we're just shooting arrows, and we all know to check our arrows. I know it. I know to check every single arrow I have, but when I get out there and I'm shooting bucks and I'm finishing off, or I'm doing this, or I'm grabbing my arrows, it just happened so quick where that one slid back in my quiver and I didn't recheck it. And I handed that arrow to Rob and he found that crack in it. And I mean, I shattered that arrow with very minimal pressure and that thing would have exploded in my bow if I would have shot it again, dude. It's so scary.
Dude, I forgot about this scenario, but it was last year and it was 100% my fault. I'm an idiot. I'm gonna admit to it. We were in Hawaii, myself and Eva, and we're on Maui, and we're hunting deer or whatever, and we're gonna pack up and we're gonna move over to Lanai. So we pack up all our stuff and we get over to Lanai and we're setting our bows up and everything and putting them together. And I fill up Eva's quiver, but what I failed to do was take an arrow out on Maui. She shot at a deer and it cracked the back over at the knock because she hit a rock. And I was like, okay, this arrow's bad. I'll put it at the bottom and I need to throw it away at some point. So we get to Lanai, that arrow ended up in her quiver. And then we're at the range. It was her first arrow when we got to Lanai. She put that arrow, knocked it, and shot it. The arrow blew up. Her bow derailed, and it screwed her head up for the rest of the hunt. Like this is something that, and we're lucky. Jason Menderos over there, he let us use his bow press to, we're lucky that the string didn't break or anything. But the arrow blew up. It did make it down to the target, so she didn't get injured or anything. But this is right here. It was a huge mistake on my part. As soon as you see that damaged arrow, bend it over your knee and snap it, whatever you got to do, and throw it away. It is not worth it. A little crack like that, it was stupid of me on my part to put that back in the bow case. And I didn't cut the veins off or I didn't pull the knockout like an idiot, but it could have been worse. But it was bad because it screwed her up mentally for the rest of that trip that her bow was going to blow up on her. And so, man, it brings up a good point, and that's definitely, man, that makes my stomach sick just thinking about it. But yeah, there's just so little room for error and the safety. And it's like, man, that was just, we've been doing this a long time, but we even make mistakes too. And you got close to making a mistake, and that's awesome. You guys caught it, but man, you just got to be so careful with those arrows.
Yeah, I'm glad you told that story, Dan. I think it's like a good lesson for all of us. Like, we all know to check our arrows. We all know not to shoot cracked or damaged arrows, but we have to be really diligent to always be checking our arrows. Never put a bad arrow back in the quiver. Make sure that you're diligent and disciplined. And it's not worth. I know arrows are so expensive, and a little crack on the nock, and you think you can keep shooting it, but you just can't. It's not worth it, man. And it's so lucky that Eva wasn't hurt doing that. But yeah, it messes with her head, and like my arrow, it could have been a really bad deal. And so it just reminds me that I need to double check my arrows even more so, especially when you're shooting them at animals. But even out at the range, if it misses the target or if it hits something funny, it's like, man, just check those arrows every single time. It'd make for a nightmare, and then it'd make you so gunshot. It'd make you, we have so much confidence in our bows, but yeah, if you have something like that happen, man, that's going to be in the back of your head forever. Like, you're never going to forget that. So I think it's just like, really make sure you're checking that. And then, along those same lines, it's, I had an Axis deer that, I had crawled up on this big herd, and I was kind of in this ditch, and I was just in the brush and couldn't get like really a wide open shot. I was in the shadows. I was really well concealed, and I ended up drawing on this buck, and I didn't get a shot at him. He ended up walking away like we first talked about. But I drew back, and I don't know if he ended up walking away or I ended up letting down, but really watch that brush for getting in between your cams and your strings, because that can derail a bow. And I was kind of in the brush, and I thought I had enough room to draw, and pretty soon I've got that top piece of brush that's kind of tangled in my bow at full draw, and I had to like pull away from it, be able to let down my bow. Luckily nothing got caught in between the string, but really be careful of your limbs hitting branches. That'll throw your shot off. your limbs hitting your knee if you're kneeled down or if you're sitting, and then really be careful of that brush in front of you, because these bows have so much energy and power, and it just takes one little mistake and you release that power in the wrong direction, which could be on yourself. But really got to be careful of those limbs and branches and stuff getting in between your strings and your cams. And I know I had it on this trip where I was just too tight in the brush and tried to get drawn, thought I was okay, and kind of got tangled up in that brush. And it all ended well. I didn't release the arrow, I think, because of that tree or because of that branch. But man, that stuff can be really dangerous.
It can. There's so many things that can go wrong at full draw like that. One thing that comes to mind too, in addition to that, is, especially in Hawaii, you're staying low, you're trying to be super sneaky on those sheep and just expose yourself as minimally as possible. But that lower cam, and when you send that arrow, having enough clearance with that lower cam not hitting the ground or not hitting the rock. I saw it last year in Hawaii with another guy that we were hunting with, like full draw, super low to the ground. On the shot, his cam hit a rock, and obviously he missed the animal, but it dented the cam, and it didn't bend it that much, but cam's ruined. I mean, it doesn't take much for it to be all over and you're going home. And so, yeah, it's everything. It's amazing with bow hunting, all the little things that have to go right that allow you to end up punching your tag in the end. It's just crazy if you think about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also to watch that arrow's trajectory. Like, I was just shooting at that Western Hunting Summit that Lampers puts on. He does a 3D course, and he had one shot that was over a cliff on a buck. And his rules are that you have to have 1 foot touching the stake, but really watching the clearance of that arrow over the front of that cliff. Or I think about it when I'm shooting at anything, is just to make sure that my arrow is going to clear the rock right in front of me. Because if you send an arrow right in the rock in front of you, it's like tough because your sights sit higher than your arrow comes off the bow. And so a lot of times your sights are clear where you're aiming at that animal, but your arrow isn't actually clear of the rock right in front of you. And I watched a guy in my group that leaned over the cliff to make a shot on that buck and hit that cliff right in front of him with his arrow and shattered his arrow. And luckily everybody was standing back and everything was safe. He didn't know that it wasn't going to clear, or, his sight was on the buck, but his arrow was not. And so, like, really making sure that you're clear of all rocks in front of you, making sure your cam has clearance, like you mentioned, Dan. Like, there's a bunch of things that the devil's in the details there, and you get so excited, you're so honed in on that animal that sometimes you can miss some of those obvious things. But just make sure you're going through your checklist and making sure that your arrow is going to clear what's right in front of you as well.
Yep, absolutely. As you're talking about that, I was thinking about past experiences too, with objects, on top of your shooting lane, above too. And it only took me once. It's probably been about 10 years ago. I was in the dark timber, and I shot at this bull because I had this log, this downfall that was over the top of my shooting lane, and I was like, yeah, my arrow is going to clear that. And, they make range finders and whatever that, tell you how high your arrow is going to arc for clearance. And of course, I smoke the log. And so, like, now, when I'm setting up and I have shooting lanes, I do everything in my power to set up where my shooting lanes, I do not have anything above. I have nothing above for my trajectory to hit something, because, it's a big factor. And I haven't had any experiences like that since, where I've smoked something that's on top of my shooting lane, but I think we've all been there.
Yeah, we definitely have all been there. It's like important to try to not tuck it into too tight of a window, but yeah, to know the trajectory of your arrow is really advantageous. It's like, yeah. I shoot that multi-pin slider, so I have the 5 pins. And my bottom pin's my mover, which is 60 yards in the home position, and I can move that up and roll it to 35, or I can roll it down. But besides the point, but having those multi pins like that, now what I do is when I'm going to get a shot, I kind of put my pin on the animal that I'm going to hit. Say he's at 40, I'll put my 40 pin, and then I'll look where my 20 pin is, because my 20 pin will be my trajectory of my arrow, at the top of the arc or whatever. And so, if I'm looking for a shot, I try to look at those top pins to make sure I have clearance and it's going to clear through. And, Lampers, when he sets up these 3D targets, it's why like these TAC events are so important, and these 3D shoots and things is, you have limbs that you're shooting under, that you're shooting over, that you really learn the arc of your arrow. And I think also what's really important to killing arrows is knowing that that arrow is going to arc so many times. I can just see, the top of the vitals, top of the back, and I'm shooting over a little hillside of grass or shooting over some stuff. Like you said, you never want to expose yourself too far, but knowing the arc of your arrow, I have killed a ton of animals that I know are going to arc over that hillside or that grass and drop into that animal. And I will take that shot because I know the trajectory of my arrow. So it also comes into play when you're making shots on animals, but really learning that trajectory of your arrow and how to double check that you're not going to hit those high branches, or that you're going to arc over, that log in between you and that animal, because that arrow is going to be higher than your 40 pin, is right on that log. So yeah, I think it's super important, man.
Yeah, that's a great tip that I didn't really even think about, with my single pin slider. Or double pin sliders, I don't have that point of reference with my 20, 30, and 40 of knowing where that trajectory is going to be with those pins. That's something to think about for the fixed pin guys or the horizontal pin guys. That's an advantage over a single pin for sure.
Yep, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
Dan, there was so much more I wanted to get into on this podcast, but we're already out of time. We'll have to save it for next week. But thanks so much for jumping on this week early morning and getting this recorded so we can get this released to guys. I really like that we record these podcasts so close to the release date, because I think the information is so pertinent to guys like for that season, or like we're just talking about what we're working on with our archery at that time of year. So I really like that we're able to record these and release them quick. And I think that information then really applies to guys and what they should be thinking about bow hunting.
Yep, absolutely. And that's a beautiful thing about these conversations is, we kind of have a loose, bullet point list of what we're going to talk about. But even me, by the end of these conversations, it's just like I would have never thought that we would have talked about what we did, or the awesome tips that came up. And like just after this conversation, like I'm stoked to release this. I mean, this is awesome, man.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's you almost can't make a too rigid of a plan for these podcasts, because me and you get down these rabbit holes, and it seems like the conversation always drifts away, or we always touch on different subject matter that we plan, but it's always full of like great bow hunting tips and tactics. And I think this is why this podcast will do well for us. Is, dude, there is so much information in these podcasts that help me, and I and help you, and I know if they're helping us with our bow hunting or thinking about these things, that they're helping other guys that are doing that same thing that we're doing out west.
Definitely. And then some of the stuff that we're talking about, you can't really articulate it in an article or a gear video. I mean, this is good stuff. That's, tips and tactics that are coming out that you're not going to see anywhere else. So I think that's pretty powerful. And, it gets me fired up. I hope the viewers are just as much as fired up as we both get.
100%, man.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks again, Dan. I'll check in with you here in another week or so, and we'll get another one recorded, but I sure appreciate you.
Sounds good. Likewise, buddy.